Okay, so today I wanted to talk about the next item in the Claude list, which is design Claude Code review configurations that load the correct project standards, restrict unnecessary tool access, and produce structured output suitable for automated downstream processing. All right, so what does all of that actually mean? Well, made some notes and let's take a quick look. So first and foremost, I think what it means is that we want to allow Claude to review our source code. So developers typically work in sprints or in chunks of work, and then that work gets checked into a Git repo. It gets merged with other work from other developers. And then typically we create what we call a PR to bring that stuff into, say, the development branch, so we can test all of it together. And usually when we do individual PRs and when we do larger PRs, especially, we want to test that code to make sure that there aren't any issues that could prevent us from launching that functionality, whatever it is. And the types of issues that we look for are patterns that we're supposed to follow but aren't following, poor naming convention for variables and for functions or methods within our code. There's just tons and tons of different rules and things depending on the type of development that you're doing. Typically, every organization has some sort of a coding standard that they adhere to, and so you want to make sure that you're following that standard. Additionally, you want to make sure that you're not bringing in what developers call code smells, which is functionality that works but is not ideal and could lead to performance issues or other issues. So things like that typically need to be reviewed. And when you find stuff like that, you can interview the developer, find out what they were thinking when they put this together, talk through the scenarios that they're working on, and make sure that these things are fixed before the code goes live. Now, if we wanted to have Claude do all of this work for us, so for example, instead of a person doing the review, we have no human in the loop, and we're going to ask Claude to perform the review process. The issue with Claude is that it's got to be able to understand our standards. It can follow a general knowledge of what good code looks like, but without having a solid understanding of the specific organization's code standards and the things that they have documented, that becomes a problem. Additionally, the review is just that. Like, we know how Claude could be, or really any AI agent could be really, really helpful, or tries to be helpful, in the sense that it goes above and beyond what you ask it to do typically. And so when you ask Claude for a review, unless you put some restrictions or guidelines in place that tell Claude that, like, hey, this is just a read-only thing, we do not want you to make any code changes, you'll get results that are unpredictable. In other words, Claude might find, oh, you did this mistake here, let me fix it for you. And this is something that we want to avoid during a code review. Because like it says right here, it's just a review of what's already written. We're not asking Claude to write anything new. And then the last option here is Claude typically talks to us, right? It's a chat bot. And so what we want to make sure is that the output that Claude produces is something that we can send to other tools that are part of our CI/CD pipeline, so they can make a determination if the build should be failed or if the build can proceed. Additionally, some of these changes may require new tickets. So could we, for example, send the feedback that Claude created into a different system like Jira or some other system where you have a system of record that shows that a code review has been performed, and additionally, possibly tickets created for recommended or required fixes for that PR before it could go live. So these things are important, and this is how we can handle them within this little subdomain that apparently I know nothing about. So there are a couple of different ways in which we can teach Claude our coding standards. So this goes back to option number 1 over here, understand our standards for the code. So how do we teach code our specific standards? What does that look like? So first and foremost, we have the Claude.md file. And the Claude.md file is just a markdown document that sits in the root of your project that defines the always true standards, conventions, architecture, and things that Claude must follow when it's either writing code or, in this case, reviewing code. In my particular Claude.md, I actually have sections outlining where to put my DTOs or data transfer objects. I typically rely on an asynchronous job server as well. So there's a separate project for that, and jobs have to be created and linked to the appropriate code piece or functionality that's being worked on. So all of those things are actually documented inside my Claude.md file so that when I am writing code, Claude understands that, well, I'm not writing the DTO and all this other functionality here in this one project. I'm splitting it between these different layers, the database layer, the business logic layer, the asynchronous job server, and the job that's needed for this particular functionality. The DTOs, they all get broken down into individual layers. And so that's the kind of stuff that you would put into a Claude.md file. Now, of course, that may not be enough. And so we may have very specific rules depending on the type of section that we're working on. And so Claude introduced this concept of a glob, and it works alongside grep. So these are Bash Linux commands. Grep allows you to search through files for specific content. So if you wanted to know, for example, how a particular library or component is being used, you might search for the name of that component across your entire code base, and you would probably use grep for that. On the other hand, if you wanted to look at file type matching, you would invoke this glob tool. And the glob tool basically will look for, like I work typically with C# files, so I have a lot of CS extensions. And so that would be something that you could specify as a glob. That would be a file type pattern that glob could find. So you could say something for all of these C# files, here's the recommended set of rules. Whereas for my JavaScript or JS files, I have a slightly different set of rules. And so you can maintain or have Claude understand how those different technologies work together in something like a Claude.md, and then have the more specific granular rules defined by the type of file. You could also do this not by a file type, but also using folders. So as an example here, I say we have something called source, API, and then asterisk, asterisk. So that reads as everything inside of the API folder should follow some set of rules. And so what does one of these rule files look like? So let's take a quick peek at that. And this is what one of those rules looks like. It's a combination of YAML and Markdown. The YAML is the front matter on top that defines the pattern or the path. And below are the rules that are required for that particular path or file type. And so they're very readable and very understandable type files that we can incorporate within our folders or structure and provide to Claude during this code review. The other way that we do all this is with append-system-prompt. And this is an interesting one for me, because what this does is there's a system prompt. There's basically always two prompts that are being acted upon when you work with AI. There is a system prompt which you do not interact with, that is predefined, that explains a lot about what the agent is supposed to do. It's always fed to the agent, so the agent always gets that information and always has that context. On top of that, you have your prompt, which is what you want Claude specifically to do. Now, what this does is it allows you to append the system prompt and basically provide additional instructions to Claude for a particular review that it's performing at any given time. So here, for example, we could say something like, you're a security reviewer, prioritize the OWASP top 10 list when you review this PR. And this is for that specific review, meaning we already did a review on the code. We know that the code is good. So this particular check is now only for security reasons and OWASP top 10 type of issues that we want Claude to find. And so the way this breaks down and the way I am understanding it is that across your entire solution, which might consist of multiple projects and how all of these projects are tied together, all of that is controlled by the Claude.md file. So this guy right here is repo wide. That's your entire solution, the way I see it. Now, within specific file types or folders, you've got rules with globs, which is, as we saw, is documents that look like this. And then last but not least, specific to the test that Claude is currently running for you, you can do this append-system-prompt flag, which allows you to customize what the role or how you want something that Claude is doing to be performed. And so that covers our coding standards and how we explain all that to Claude. Next on my list is reviewer handling. And so remember that what I set up here is that the review is just that. It's a review. I don't want Claude to make changes of anything that it finds wrong. I just want it to document the problems that it sees. So the main issue with us is that Claude typically can read and write files by default. And we also know that Claude wants to be very helpful in how he does things. And he can also run shell commands. It can run bash, it can run glob, it can run any number of things that could really make a disaster for your particular PR. So we want to restrict Claude from altering anything and just stick to the review. Now, you could do that to some degree with a stronger prompt, like you can tell it, like, this is a review only. under any circumstances, do not change any of the files. But when we do that, that is not guaranteed because, again, it's a deterministic type of engine where every now and then it will get something wrong and will act on it rather than follow the rules that you provide. So 9 out of 10 times it'll do it correctly, but there's always that one time, and it'll always be the worst one that will go off the rails. And so there's a couple of ways that we can restrict Claude. The first is we can restrict by specifying an allowed tool set. And here we're basically saying you're allowed to read, grep, and glob, but that's it, like nothing else. You can't write, you can't do any of that. You could also just as easily create a disallowed tool set and pass as a parameter to Claude. But my understanding is that it is absolutely better to do the allow tools, because anything not in the allowed tools is excluded by default. So it's basically, once you have allowed tools defined, those are the things that Claude knows it can do, and it'll stay away from everything else. It'll have no choice but to stay away from everything else. And so allowed tools is a better option here. And that is basically how we restrict Claude from doing something stupid with our source code when we actually just wanted to do a review. Now, the last part here is, and I'm just going to zoom out a little. The last part here is Claude output. And as we know, Claude likes to talk. For example, if you want to reduce your token count, there is a caveman skill that you can download that works with Claude as well as other agents that prevents Claude from being as verbose as it is. And this cuts down on some of the usage that you pay for through the burning of tokens. So we all know that, and we want to do a couple of things here. So first of all, we want to make sure that Claude doesn't respond to us in a chat sequence, right? We don't want paragraphs and paragraphs of content from Claude. We want very specific structured responses that go to JSON, because we're not reading this, we're sending this to other tools, and those tools need to be able to parse this output and be able to either create tickets, create additional tasks or whatever it is, or add the information to a change management process, or fail the build because you have too many high priority items that break the build. So there's a couple of things we can do here to achieve that. The first one is this -p parameter. This forces Claude to run in a non-interactive mode. So it doesn't ask any questions or create any chat output. And that's very useful. Now, this next line here is really a GitHub code review command. So GH is the GitHub CLI. And we're basically asking it to review pull request number 123. Now, the pipe that follows it, which is this guy right here, makes the output from GitHub command available to Claude. So in other words, we want to run a PR, and we want to do a review of this. We want to see the differences for pull request 1, 2, 3. We want to feed them to Claude and ask Claude to review this. So the pipe combines these two tools together, and this becomes the work that Claude is actually performing. Now, the full line, the full actual parameter line, looks like this. And this allows us to not only call GitHub and get the output that we need for Claude, but then we pass it to Claude, We give it the prompt that we want it to use. We specify the tools that we want it to work with. And finally, we also tell it to output this into a JSON format. So once that's done, the return string that comes back from Claude is something that an incoming tool can consume, read, parse, and work with. And so this is the answer to this particular problem.